The room that broke my mind. I did not know a room could unmake a person until I met that one. It was small and square, with walls the color of old paper and a single window that refused to open more than a finger's width. The air smelled like dust and boiled tea leaves, and every sound echoed as if the walls were listening and storing secrets. I arrived with a suitcase that felt heavier than my life, convinced that if I stayed long enough, the room would finally tell me what was wrong with me. I had come after everything else fell apart. My job dissolved quietly, my marriage cracked loudly, and my confidence slipped away like water through cupped hands. Friends meant well but spoke in advice. Family spoke in worry. I wanted silence, so I rented the cheapest place I could find and promised myself I would rest, think, and become whole again. Instead, the room pressed down on me from the first night, turning thoughts into echoes and echoes into accusations. The bed creaked with every movement, reminding me that sleep was a negotiation, not a gift. I lay awake counting the cracks in the ceiling and the regrets in my chest. I replayed conversations until they lost meaning. I rehearsed apologies that would never be spoken. When dawn arrived, it felt like an interruption rather than relief. I ate little, spoke less, and began to believe that the room was revealing a truth I had been avoiding, that I was broken beyond repair. Days blurred. I stopped opening the curtains. I avoided the mirror because my eyes looked unfamiliar, too sharp, too tired. The room seemed to shrink, or perhaps I did. It was easy to imagine never leaving, becoming another quiet tenant the walls absorbed. The room did not hurt me outright, it simply agreed with my worst thoughts. It nodded when I told myself I was a burden. It echoed when I said I had failed at being human. On the seventh day, a knock came. It startled me so badly that my heart raced as if I'd been running. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days, and the idea of being seen felt dangerous. The knock came again, gentle, patient. I opened the door a few inches and saw an elderly woman holding a small tray. Her hair was silver and neatly tied back, her eyes bright and curious rather than intrusive. "I live downstairs," she said, smiling as if we were old friends. "I make soup on Sundays. There's always too much." I wanted to refuse. I had perfected refusal. But the smell of warm broth slipped past my defenses, and something inside me cracked in a way that hurt and relieved at the same time. I stepped aside. She entered without comment, placing the tray on the small table as if she belonged there, as if the room was capable of hosting kindness. She did not ask why I looked the way I did. She did not offer advice. She simply poured soup into a bowl and handed it to me with both hands. The warmth seeped into my fingers. I realized I hadn't felt warm in days. "Eat," she said. "Thinking is easier when the body isn't angry." We ate in silence. The soup tasted like care, like someone had stirred patience into it. When I finished, she collected the bowl and looked around the room, not critically but attentively, as if she were learning its language. "This room," she said softly, "is very loud." I laughed despite myself. The sound surprised us both. She returned the next day with bread. The day after that, with fruit. Sometimes she stayed. Sometimes she left the food and went on her way. She told me small stories about her life, how she had once wanted to be a teacher, how she missed her sister, how she liked to watch pigeons argue on the rooftop. She never asked me to share, and because of that, I eventually did. I told her about the job, the marriage, the feeling of being hollowed out by disappointment. I told her about the room and how it seemed to confirm my worst fears. She listened the way good listeners do, without preparing a response, without trying to fix me. "The mind," she said once, "is like a room too. If you leave it empty for too long, it fills itself with whatever noise is nearby." I began to open the curtains in the mornings. Light entered cautiously, as if unsure it was welcome. The dust in the air turned golden instead of gray. I started making the bed, not because it mattered, but because it felt like a small promise kept. The room did not change, but my relationship with it did. It no longer felt like a verdict. It felt like a place where something was happening. One afternoon, I found a note slipped under my door. The handwriting was neat and careful. It invited me to tea downstairs. I hesitated, then went. Her apartment was cluttered and alive, full of plants and mismatched furniture. The windows were wide open. The air moved. We drank tea and watched the street below. She asked me what I noticed. I said the way people hurried, the way a child dragged a stick along a fence, the way a dog refused to be rushed. She nodded as if I'd passed a test. Attention, she said, is a form of kindness. To others, and to yourself. Days became weeks. I started going for walks. I wrote letters I did not send. I laughed more easily. The room still had its moments, especially at night, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It was a witness, and witnesses can be faced. One evening, I heard the knock and opened the door to find the tray on the floor, but no one in the hallway. There was a note: I will be away for a few days. Eat. Open the window. You are not alone. I did as instructed. I opened the window wider than before. The air rushed in, cool and insistent. The room exhaled. I sat on the bed and realized that my thoughts were quieter. Not because problems had vanished, but because I was no longer shouting at myself. When she returned, she looked tired but pleased. We talked less about me and more about everything else. She showed me old photographs. I fixed a loose hinge on her door. Kindness moved between us without ceremony, a shared understanding that neither of us needed to be impressive to be worthy. The day came when I packed my suitcase again. This time, it felt lighter. I told her I had found work, that I was moving closer to the city. She hugged me, a firm, honest embrace. Remember, she said, rooms don't break minds. Silence does. Fill your days with voices that tell the truth. On my last night, I sat in the room and took it in. The walls were still the color of old paper. The window still resisted. But the room had held something fragile and alive while I learned how to breathe again. It had not broken my mind after all. It had revealed where it was cracked, and where light could enter. I left the key on the table and opened the door. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt the room behind me, quiet now, not in agreement with my fears, but at rest.